Hello. Hello, hello, hello. I'm Maria Davis. I'm back again. Just glad to see everybody. Glad to see you're in the room. And here again to talk about some very interesting things. But first, I want to know, have you signed up yet? Have you signed up for the Thrive retreat that's taking place on June 30th through August 4th in Tulum, Mexico? If you have not, go over to my website, aureliadavis.com, click on the Thrive Retreat, and just go and register and just find out all of the interesting and exciting things that's going to be happening from July 30th to August 4th, 2024 at the Thrive Retreat, which is going to take place in Tulum, Mexico. I want to make sure I say that. Tulum, Mexico. I'm going to be there and I would love to see you there also. But in the meantime, but some of the things that's going to be happening, we're talking about beautiful accommodations. We're talking about food, 3 meals a day. We're talking about innovative workshops and excursions in that particular area, being able to just sit on the beach and just enjoy the sun, all the things that are needed for teachers after teaching throughout the year. This is something that you need. It's a good piece of therapy. Okay, I'm just going to say it like that. It's good therapy because during the summertime, you have to just sort of revitalize yourself to go back into that classroom in September to start it all over again. And before you know it, you'll have about 10 or 15 years. And just like I looked up and I was at 31 years, but I enjoyed every minute of it, enjoyed every minute of it. So go to my website, aureliadavis.com, the Thrive Retreat that's going to take place July 30th through August 4th in Tulum, Mexico. Tulum, Mexico. I like saying that word, Tulum, Mexico. But today I'm just going to tapping into an interesting subject that has been around, even it was around when I was teaching. Title One, Title One funding, Title One funding. That particular funding that comes from the United States government has a lot of interesting connections to it. Um, Back in 1965, President Johnson decided that he wanted to sign over a funding project for schools that are in mostly schools that are in the inner cities and even in some rural communities where there was a sense of children not being having everything they needed in order for them to learn. So you're talking about a poverty level that was very high at that time and is still high today, still high today. So the Title One funding was given and produced at that particular time or introduced at that particular time to help children in need, to help children, to help families in the poverty level. And usually, what happened with that Title One funding is that you would go into a school, and when you would go into a school, they would ask you if you were free or reduced lunch, free or reduced lunch. And according to how many free or reduced lunches were in that school, would add up to the amount of funding that particular school would have. So, just an example, if you were in a neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, say in the city of Chicago, and you were in the neighborhood that basically had a lot of disadvantages, a lot of disadvantages. The parents were not necessarily working or single family parents. Not saying that they cannot take care of their kids, but you're looking at single parent families. You're looking at uh, children that are being raised by their grandparents, so on and so forth. All of those types of things, and you apply to the school that's down the street or around the corner. And if that particular child coming from that particular family needed reduced lunch, then they would sign an application to get reduced lunch. That means basically their lunch and breakfast, if they were serving breakfast at that time, that would be free to that particular child. It also helped children that if there were like more than maybe 5 or 6 kids or 2 or 3 in one particular family, that means that whole family would receive reduced lunch. Well, those numbers were taken and used for funding for that particular school. I'll say that again. Those numbers were taken and used for funding for that particular school. So when I was teaching, the school that I taught, where I taught, it really wasn't considered a totally Title I funded school. It was not totally Title I funded, but it did have children in the building that received Title I funding or free lunch. And what would happen is that we would receive extra materials, we would receive extra programs, even received teachers, and at one time there was an exit of art programs and an exit of music programs that were taken out of schools because the powers that be felt at that particular time that it was more important to put in programs for reading and math, science and social studies than for art and music. So I do believe and remember, and Mr. Nelson probably can clue in on this, that the many years that he taught at my school, he was under what's considered Title I funding. Title I funding, and that allowed our students to have art weekly, and that was from kindergarten all the way to 8th grade, and it was a beautiful program. Mr. Nelson was a fantastic teacher. I hope he's listening, but he was a fantastic teacher, and he produced the best art. That Title I funding also allowed us to have a full music program. We have had some beautiful and fantastic music teachers in our building that produced plays and just balanced out the curriculum of social studies, science, reading, and math. Social studies, science, reading, and math. That music and art is so very important to have in a building. And if you ever get to the point where those are programs that you love, if you ever get to the point where you want to move to the school, change your employment to a school, look to see if they have the funding, see if they have the music and art programs, because those are very, very, very important for children's development also. Well, what's happening now, it seems that I was reading an article about some schools in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was being stated that they were losing funding, Title I funding, for certain schools that had had it before. And the reason they were losing Title I funding for schools that had had it previously, and I think most likely it was something beyond the pandemic, is that because the boundaries had changed as far as the poverty levels. So when they're looking at Title I funding, they're looking at free and reduced lunches. And usually those children that are getting free and reduced lunches are most likely are leveling at a poverty level that's measured by the state. And they were saying that these schools that had had this funding before no longer were having it, for the simple reason that the poverty level had changed, and where there were so many children in that particular building receiving free and reduced lunches before are no longer getting it. Well, that brought an uproar. Because as the funding ended, then all of the extra programs and resources ended with the funding. And that can be something that can be dealt with on the state level or the local level, or just basically within certain communities, because even to the point, as far as politics are concerned, it got to the point in some states where schools were recruiting children of free and reduced lunches so that they could receive some of the funding that was being doled out to other schools. And my whole perspective on all of this is that schools, there needs to be a balance across the board. Whatever this school is getting in this particular neighborhood that might be a little bit more affluent should be the same thing that this school is getting in this neighborhood where they don't have as many advantages as the school in the affluent areas. And it gets to the point where you as a community and parents have to really speak out about these things, or else they're just going to pass you by. Title I funding also helps teachers that have student loans. If you have a student loan and if you're going into an application, the first thing they might ask you is, did your school, was your school under Title One funding? And if you do say yes, then they want to know exactly how much Title One funding was your school getting. And usually that's considering you to be teaching in an area that's more needed. You're teaching in a more urban area. You're teaching in an area where the children may have more disadvantages, and so that means that those children are needing adults, more adults in that building to help fill the resources that they need. So that's the type of thing that where it helps if you know if you have student loans, if you have student loans. But my personal thing is this: the particular article was also talking about free and reduced lunch and carrying free lunches and free breakfasts into the summertime. Carrying free lunches, doing free lunches and breakfasts in the summertime. So where these children were getting free lunches and free breakfast, free lunch during the school year, now they were looking for funding to carry it throughout the summer. So, in some situations where children are attending summer school, they will get free lunches, because usually they're only in that building for like for a half a day. But if those children were not attending summer school, and when you think back, this happened during the pandemic for the simple reason that they felt that these children that were eating free lunches on a regular basis throughout the pandemic still needed free lunches. And so, all over the United States, children were able to go to to their school buildings and get free lunches. And I think they carried it out maybe until 2022. 2022, and then they stopped it because basically at that time the pandemic was over. But now they're in the discussion as to how some of the questions are: how often are we supposed to take care of children, and where are the parents that are taking care of these children, providing breakfast, providing lunch, and providing dinner for children, providing breakfast, providing lunch, and providing dinner for children. Well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. At one time, it was questioned as to how nutritious the lunches were that children were eating, and that went back all the way back into early 1900s when poverty was just throughout the country, and there was things going on where children were not getting the right nutrition, and of course, nutrition uh, energizes brain cells. Okay, I hope I said it right. Nutrition energizes brain cells. A child that is hungry cannot learn. A child that is hungry cannot learn. So, what has happened is that where we have assumed children are getting nutritious lunches and breakfasts and dinners at home, it may not be happening. And it does not necessarily mean that if the family is affluent or not, how much of a nutritious breakfast or a nutritious lunch is that child eating on a daily basis. So this particular district in it's Montgomery, Alabama, they decided that they would love to continue the lunch program throughout the summer because they did not want to assume that these children were getting whatever the nutritious breakfast, dinners, lunches, and all of those throughout the summertime. And it's a hit or miss situation. You really cannot sort of go into a household and say, what are you serving? But at the same time, I look at it as parents being very busy and not being able to cook those meals the way they would like to. I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose, but the way they would like to serve those meals and cook those meals for the children. There's so many microwave and instant stuff up here nowadays. And what we're finding is that as we are children are being fed or eating these types of meals, how many McDonald's kids do we have? Some of these babies know McDonald's before they know green beans. Okay, they know about McDonald's before they know about green beans. And I'm not knocking the parents because it's a time factor. It's a time factor that you have to put in place in order for the children to get this way. I'm going to be honest. I did it. I did quick fast meals when I was raising my child. I did quick fast meals when I was raising my child, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was done on purpose. But you have to meet these families that have these children. You have to meet them where they are. And you just can't take it for granted that you do not want to assist with these children, because when it finally comes down to it, that child that might be, may have not had a good breakfast that morning, and he's coming into your classroom, he's not ready to learn, or she's not ready to learn, and you're not going to get too much accomplished during this time. So for them to do, because I remember even when I was teaching, there was a time when we did not have breakfast. We didn't do breakfasts. And then there came down a mandate from the state where we start doing breakfasts, because some of the children were being dropped off as early as 6 and 7 in the morning. And we had to determine what that looked like also, if there was somebody in the building. But if the parents were working that early and they had to drop their children off, they were dropping their children off because those children were traveling, because they were traveling from another part of the city, they had to drop them off. Then you would see children sitting on the steps and in the cold, being Chicago, sitting on the steps, maybe 6:30 in the morning. And knowing at 6:30 in the morning, most likely that child has not had a breakfast, has not had breakfast. So what happened is that a state mandate came down where we will give them breakfast. And so I was giving my students breakfast in the morning. I was giving them breakfast in the morning, and it was the option of if they wanted it or not, which is good. They had the option to eat it if they wanted it. If they did not want to eat it, they didn't have to eat it. But there was usually quick meals, Cheerios and milk or fruit. A lot of times fruit was added to it, but milk was added to it. And a lot of the children took advantage of it. They took advantage of it and ate that breakfast, and then of course they would eat lunch. And then if they were in an after school program, we usually had a snack then too. So you're thinking about the length of time these children are with you throughout the day. You have to keep them fed. You have to keep them fed. I'm going to even go this way. During the time when my colleague and I were giving the Iowa test, well, not the Iowa test, the ISAT. We started getting the ISAT because we taught third grade. And being that particular test was so long, it was a long test. It took over so many days and so on and so forth. And we just was working on it in the morning and so forth. She and I decided that we were going to recruit to the parents, ask the parents to give us graham crackers and apple juice. Now you may ask, why graham crackers and apple juice? Because those things were more natural and it didn't have as much sugar in it. So we would ask for graham crackers or apple cider or apple juice. And when our students would take that test, they would start taking the test, and about midway through the test, then what we would do is we would give them a snack of graham crackers and apple juice. Now, I don't know if the graham crackers and the apple juice had magical effects on them, but it did get them through the test, and our children scored very well during the years we did it. Our principal couldn't understand it, but after it started working, she accepted and said, "This is great. I love it. Keep doing what you're doing." So that's what we did. So that even in those types of situations, you just cannot assume that children have eaten. You cannot assume that the food was at the table. And it could be in a regular household, any household. We're just going to put everybody in the same household and see what's going on. So I do advocate for lunches and breakfast during the summertime. If the funding is there, feed our children. If the funding is there, feed our children. They deserve it. They deserve it. And it's up to us as a country, as a state, and as a city to take care of our children. And one way of taking care of them is feeding them through Title I fund. I don't care where the funding is coming from, feed our children. It is so interesting now because teachers and because schools are feeding more into children that are coming into their building. They're starting to pay attention to how children come into the building, what, how, I'm just going to be honest, how they may smell, or if they look, if they look ruffled, if their hair hasn't been combed, if their shoes, if they, they're coming in the wintertime and they don't have any boots or jackets or warm jackets and things like that. We are living in a country now where it's everybody, it takes a village. That's what this whole thing has come down. It takes a village for all of us to feed into the students that we have in order for them to, a child can learn better when they feel good about themselves. A child can learn very well when he feels good about himself. How he got up that morning. It may have been a disgruntled house. You don't know. And you don't take it for granted that everybody's house is stable. You don't take it for granted that everybody's house, that people are not having issues, that parents are not going through struggles, some things that they cannot help. So you don't take it out on the child. You don't take it out on the child, but you help that child to achieve the goal that you want them to achieve. So some schools have gotten to the point where they are putting washers and dryers. Some companies are putting washers and dryers in the buildings. There are some barbers and beauticians that are coming out to the schools. And then there are even people and companies that are helping young girls go to the prom, whether they have a date or not. They're giving them those dresses so they can attend proms. This takes the village taking care of our children. And that's what we have to continue to do. I'm in a couple of organizations right now that is what I focus on. What I focus on is what can we do for our children, and especially the neighborhood where I grew up. What can we do for our children? We are still responsible for them, whether they're in our building or not. That's why there were so many, they talk about before school programs and have had to open their doors, about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and making sure somebody is there to meet those children as the parents drop them off because they have to go to their job. And then you have programs, after school programs, that last as long as maybe 5 o'clock. And the parents will come and pick them up. I'm sure the parents are appreciating this. I'm sure they are. I'm sure that they are appreciating this. But we as a village of educators, that's what I'm going to call us. We as a village of educators are responsible for our children in and out of the buildings. And the Title I funding, I hope they just continue to put more state by state into Title I funding, because it can be used for so many different projects. It can be used for so many different resources that are needed and still needed. It was needed back in 1965 when President Johnson signed off on it, and is needed in 2024. Okay. Still needed. We haven't gotten to that level where we no longer need extra resources to put into our schools. Wow. This is Aurelia Davis coming to you. Feel free to go over to my website, and don't forget, click on the Thrive Retreat and see where we're going to be July 30th through August 4th in Tulum, Mexico. Looking to see you there, because I'm going to be there, and I hope to have you with me. This is Aurelia Davis. Go over to my website, aureliadavis.com, and just see my offerings. And I enjoyed talking to you today. Remember, we are a village of educators. We are a village of educators ready to take care of our children. Have a nice afternoon and evening. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.